Well, we're already live. We're gonna run right into it.
All right.
We can always trim it, but we'll see if this works. If this allows me to get to it. Okay. All right. All right, guys. Welcome you guys to another episode of Burning Hintz Fantasy Football. I'm here with Scott Hinty, and we're going to go over our top 5 busts and sleepers for the draft this year. It's kind of a little wonky right now. It's a little early, but I still think that there's decent content here. So we want to just start off with busts. So I'm gonna hide some of this stuff here. Silence my phone. So at 5, you have Chris Godwin. Why don't you like
Yes.
Chris Godwin this year? I know there's been some reports about his.
Um, so I should have put Chris Godwin and DeAndre Hopkins in the same area. Because I'm off both of them for the same reason, which is um I'm not sure about I'm not sure about Chris Godwin's availability. I'm sure about DeAndre Hopkins' availability. But Godwin late like end of the year ACL tear. Um it does I've not heard great things about him coming back. I've heard things where the team says he'll be back week 1, but then I've also seen a lot of doctors and injury people projecting him to not be back until October, which means you're going to miss him for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And so to me, I love Chris Godwin. I think whenever he gets back and he's fully healthy, he'll be amazing. But I think you're not going to have a fully healthy Chris Godwin until over halfway through the season, at which point it's going to be a bust. So,
Yeah, I think if you can get him really late, like 2 or 3 rounds later than what he's going already, and just I think it's all kind of crap what they're saying. It's just so he'll be ready week 1, and then they sign Julio Jones. It just
yeah.
what they're doing, and what they're saying generally don't match it, and I feel like there's a lot of players sort of in this sort of position where it's. I think we had like there was a report Chase Young's not going to be back until like mid-season. There's like a lot of guys who had like mid to late season injuries that like aren't going to be popping up as quick as you think they are. So it's
Yeah.
that's one where just it's scary to draft these guys as high as they're getting drafted when they're really you don't even know if they're going to play like in the first 6. Question is, will we see on IR? That'll be like something interesting because I think a lot of people have their drafts a little bit closer to this regular season than people might be just putting their showing their cards at some point just to get more roster spots. So at 5, I have Josh Jacobs. I was just surprised by how high he still is. I think I saw him like in the 6th round in one of my like last mocks, which isn't like terrible, but it's still like I just don't buy anything that's happening with Vegas, and they're just so quiet right now. I feel like they could be throwing the ball a lot more, and plus, there's just a new coach who just drafted a running back, and they declined his option. It just says scary to me. And even if he does play well, I mean, what's happened the last couple of years? It's been a lot of like not really him being able to stay on the field. He's been sort of a injured player a lot. He's had a couple good weeks, but like I wouldn't draft him super high. He's not like a bad player, but he's in a bad spot.
Yeah. I mean, I can see this. I kind of like where he's going in drafts just because it is the 6th round. You're not paying like what I think last year was a 3rd round. The year before that, we're talking like 2nd round. So his ADP's really fallen. But I do agree with them drafting the running back, the new coach that didn't bring Jacobs in. They still have Drake there that you don't really think about, but he's still on the roster and was eating carries before he got hurt last year. So I think Jacobs will be okay, but it does concern me because it might be a Patriots situation where you'll have a bunch of guys, but none of them are really consistent enough for you to feel confident in starting them.
Yeah, I just when you see some of the other guys that are getting drafted around him, which I saw like I've seen J.K. Dobbins within like 5 or 6 picks of him, which is just like I don't know, I can't imagine doing that. And there's guys that I'll get to in my sleepers that are a lot lower than him that just don't seem as good of a punch. So I think we both have a lot of receivers in this. I think there's just that's sort of like just a popular thing on both sides. But I think most of my busts are receivers, except for I think my first one. But you got DK Metcalf, who just got big time paid, and he's playing with who we don't know really know at quarterback.
Yeah. So from my understanding, the starter at this point will be Gino. It sounds like Drew Lock is running with the second team. But even with Gino being there, like this is a guy who's being drafted around like basically like Deontay Johnson, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, Michael Pittman, Jerry Jude, or Mike Williams. Like those are the receivers that are around him. And to me, I don't want to go with a team that I believe to be a bad offense. Like even with Geno Smith there, like I think that you'll still have some value. I mean, this goes with Tyler Lockett here too, but Tyler Lockett has at least not being drafted in the fourth round still. I think Tyler Lockett, he's completely off my draft board. I don't see any value in him at all. DK Metcalf, I see some value, but I think you're going to see a lot of inconsistencies. Last year, when he played with Geno Smith, he played actually fairly well, but one of those games, it was saved by like a 79-yard touchdown pass for him to be a top 24 wide receiver. So it just, his situation scares me. And with the other receivers around him, I don't see why. I think where he's being drafted is what makes him a bust, which is why I have a lot of these guys on here. Like, I just pulled it up just to look. Chris Godwin is currently going in the back half of the fifth, and to not have him on your to have a guy like that on your roster not be able to play for the first probably 4 weeks minimum really hurts you.
Yeah, he's just not. I've never been that big of a fan of DK Metcalf, and I feel like it's just a really, really bad situation here with him. He's like a kind of a boomer bust player already, and now it's going to be a little bit even worse. I mean, he's not going to get the great deep passes like he did with Russell Wilson. He'll still get the occasional play. He's not like a bad receiver, but it just doesn't really make sense. I mean, there's guys like on the next band, I guess you would say, like in the fifth round, that I would way more take over him. Like guys like DJ
Yeah.
Moore, Mike Williams. Like I don't really see why he would even be in that area. Like he'd be, fifth, end of the fifth, early sixth sort of type deal. It just seems like a Seahawks are someone that like I think you can find value in that team, but the value it's a value pick. You're taking
Yeah.
him late to find some like good value out of him. And sort of the situation I feel like for my guy at number four, I mean, this is sort of like a boom bust thing if Deshaun doesn't actually get a full year suspension. But even if he like does, I mean, Amari Cooper, it could help you out in the playoffs. But I'm just not crazy about Amari Cooper. I used to be really big on him in Oakland. He sort of fell apart just when he was just not really in a good situation, and I feel like that's going to sort of happen here with Jacoby Brissett quarterback. It's sort of a weird, sort of lame duck almost feeling with the Browns, just basically saying like we're gonna try to compete without Deshaun, but clearly they're not gonna be able to compete. Like it's a really, really tough division. Jacoby didn't really exactly have like huge numbers whenever he was playing before, and Amari is like a solid guy, but I don't think he's ever been like a huge, difference maker except for like 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Just not I feel like it could go well, and it's like possible that could happen, but like I feel like it could get so much worse. Like your floor is very low with him, and I could just see it kind of being a disaster year. It's not like he's being super super overdrafted. I feel like DK Metcalf is, but I just feel like the floor is so low with Amari. It's kind of scary.
I agree. Also, watching Amari last year, I felt like he lost a little bit of a step. So I think like I completely agree with this bust, especially like with I think with Watson there, he'll be fine because Watson's going to put up numbers, but without him there, I don't think there's any chance. And I don't see a world where Deshaun doesn't get at least 6 games.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I feel like it's gonna be closer to like the 12. It feels like maybe there's not gonna be a season. They're just waiting so long, but we'll see. So we're gonna go to three, and I'm sure you're gonna disagree with my third, but you've got Cam Akers at three.
Yeah, I have Cam Akers. And this is just like, I mean, his ADP right now is back into the third, which is like that's extremely high.
Yeah.
He's also only played like, I don't even think he has a full 16 games as a starter. I know he only has one game as a top 10 running back in those the games that he's played. And last year in the playoffs, he averaged like under, I think it was like 2.5 yards carry or something, which is not like, that's just bad. We've never seen a player come back from an Achilles as quick as he has, and we've never seen a player come back from the Achilles and be productive within like the best example we have is Deontay Foreman, and that took him years after the Achilles to get back to being a backup running back that was productive whenever the starter was out. So to me, Cam Akers is a giant red flag and just not interested.
Yeah, it just feels a little high, and I do feel like also the Rams sort of have a little bit of that kind of Patriot feel. It could also go the other way because they obviously did the single running back with Todd Gurley, but they have a lot of different guys that they swap in and swap out, and it's hard for me to believe. I was already skittish before he got hurt. I remember he was getting drafted very high, and it was just sort of a question mark as to why. It could all play out, but I just don't really see it happening. It's just a lot of risk. I think I agree with that. I feel like there's guys in the fifth round that you can get that are a little bit a little bit safer, I guess, or at least the same type of risk. Like I'd put him. I feel like Cam Akers feels around like a little bit ahead of Miles Sanders around that area. Like I think he's a little bit a higher ceiling, but like maybe the same exact kind of floor. And the Eagles kind of have a people are really riding high on the Eagles. But yeah, I kind of third round just feels scary for some guy that really hasn't even produced at all. And
Yeah.
is coming off of an Achilles. So for three, I have T Higgins. I just was always so surprised. I keep seeing him a number two receiver being with all these. I mean, he's in the McLaurin area. I'm just surprised he's like ahead of McLaurin and like a lot of stuff. I'm just like I can't really. I feel like there's a lot of risk, and I'm sort of contrarian on this Bengals. At the beginning I was really against the Bengals. Now I'm like softening up to them, but I just can't really see him putting up like, or at least I don't feel comfortable putting a number two up that high. I guess I just feel like there's also my sort of soft spot for Tyler Boyd that he's not gonna like he'll get other touches too, and I just it's tough for me to see that number two that high above all these quality number ones. Like I feel like I would trust guys like DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, like those that band, and I'd be feel way more safe. Obviously, T. Higgins has maybe a little bit of a higher ceilings, but I just feel like it's a real risk to put a number two that high.
So I mean, to me, he's a top 24 wide receiver, easy, potentially a top 12 to me. And this being like, with that being said, like he's not going to be top 12 by being consistent. Like
Yeah.
that's not how he's going to be there. If you're looking for a consistent receiver, he's not your guy. Go draft Keenan Allen. Like Keenan Allen will get you like 8 receptions and 50 yards and a few touchdowns throughout the year. Uh, but every single year, there's a team that has multiple wide receivers in the top 12. You had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett a few years back. You had the Mike Evans, Chris Godwin year. I mean, every single year that I know, like there's at least one team that has two top 12 receivers. And to me, I think that's going to be the Bengals this year. I think Chase is locked in. I think T Higgins will be there. But I do see like looking at he is the team's number two, and he is going to have those games where he's going to go out there and he's going to get you 0 points. And that's just going to be something that happens with players on a team that have like so many weapons. But I do think that he's going to have those blow up games that'll win you those weeks also with those 0 point weeks. So
Yeah, I'm not like against T. Higgins in general. I just am always like I know I think it was like 12th or 13th last year, but for me
yeah.
it's just like we'll
And
talk more about when I get to my number one about it, but
well, I was gonna say, and last year with like for the first half of the year last year, a lot of people were like, "What do I do with T. Higgins? He's doing nothing." And there's a chance that that happens again, and then he has a back half of the year where he just goes off.
yeah, where the Bengals just
Like,
went crazy.
I don't expect T. Higgins to be consistent. I expect him to just put up numbers by the end of the year.
Gotcha. All right, I'm gonna swap down and throw our ones and twos up. All right, so two, we've got an interesting one here. At two, you have DeAndre Hopkins, and we're sort
Yeah.
of on the same wavelength, but opposites.
So let's just kind of talk about these at the same time
Yeah.
because you have Hollywood there and I have DeAndre Hopkins here. My bust is DeAndre Hopkins because he's out 6 weeks guaranteed.
Hmm.
That is half of the regular season of the fantasy league. So for half of the year, you will not have DeAndre Hopkins on your roster. Which to me is just like I don't know exactly where he's going right now because to me he's just off my board. He's currently going in the 7th round.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say late seventh, early eighth is around there.
Um, so just like looking at other receivers that are going around there, you have like Juju Smith-Schuster, you have Drake London, you have Adam Thielen. Um, I mean, you have Darnell Mooney, you have Brandon Cooks. Like you have players who to me like I would much rather have Brandon Cooks, Darnell Mooney, like those guys I'd much rather have because they're going to put up numbers for the first 6 games of the year, which
Mhm.
is also kind of why I like Hollywood because he's going to be the number one wide receiver on a team that is going to pass the ball and be productive. And Hollywood has been a top 24 wide receiver. So
Yeah. So I guess it just comes down to my most recent when I was drafting, and I was just surprised because I landed DeAndre Hopkins I think in the late seventh, and I was already stacked at receiver, so it just went really well for me. I was like, oh my god, I already have 2, 3 receivers. This is just more like basically, you can screw yourself by the way you draft essentially with DeAndre Hopkins. If you feel like, oh, I have 2 receivers and I can get my third as DeAndre Hopkins, you could pretty much screw yourself because of just how much you need receivers and then kind of how much it falls off around like the 10th round. Um, but like the reason with Hollywood Brown is I just feel like it's a funky situation in Arizona, and Hollywood Brown I've never been high on. I know that's always been like sort of you've been a little bit higher on it, and he sort of shows up sometimes, but he's such a big play, big bust receiver, and they have so many people there already. I just feel like you could really get a lot of good stuff in 6 weeks, and then it could sort of just fall off the cliff if Kyler Murray just says, "I'm going to throw it to Hopkins," because he's one of those heavily targeted players that's sort of like Stephon Diggs, where the I guess it happened a lot less last year, but also Hopkins got hurt. But Kyler was a very much I'm going to zero in on Hopkins, especially his first year with him, and it could happen like, hey, we're playing for people's jobs here. We're starting 3-3 in a tough division. And it just Hollywood Brown for me has always been a. I guess it's more exciting this year, but I remember when I was seeing him drafted, he was getting drafted around the 5th round, and I was just like, eh. I feel like there's other people that I could get for the full season that could put up that same sort of consistent play. And I know your sort of strategy with him is pawn Hollywood off in the 5th week or some sort of shit like that, right?
I mean, even if you don't do that, I still think that throughout the year he will be productive. And regardless, you're gonna have 6 weeks. You're gonna have half of the year. You're going to have production out of Hollywood as the top 24 wide receiver.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think we'll get to this a little bit later too. Um, So your number one is Najee Harris, is a guy I've been pretty high on, but there is good reason for it.
Yeah. So for me, like I'm not saying Najee Harris is going to not be an RB1 this year. He will be an RB1. Like I just don't think to me, I don't have him where he's being drafted, which is why he's a bust. And he's a bust in the first round because like last year he finishes the RB number 5. Um, and he did it through being extremely consistent, like with touches, not with like touchdowns or anything.
Yeah.
He also had Big Ben who didn't want to get hit and could not throw the ball more than 15 yards down the field. Trubinsky can throw the ball. He also still has legs that he can run around with and will run with if he needs to, rather than checking it down to Najee Harris. I think you'll still see a lot of production on Najee Harris. I think he'll still be really good. I just don't think you're going to see the same consistency that you had from him last year. And when I look at my running back rankings, I have him like I think around 8 from like our top 10. I can't really remember right now.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, like there's a ton of other players around there that I would rather have than Najee Harris. So to me, where he's being taken right now, which I believe is like the 5th running back on the board behind like the top 4, and then it's you have Najee Harris there. And to me, I have Najee Harris at like I'd rather have Joe Nixon who's going behind him. I'd rather have like James Conner, Leonard Fournette, DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, like all of those guys. I think I'd rather have than Najee Harris, and I can get them a round or two later.
Hmm. I agree with some of that. I definitely have rather have Mixon and Swift over him. It's the James Conner area where I'm a little bit less agreeable with that. I do like I definitely am further down than I was a couple weeks ago on Najee Harris just because of like the I don't know if you've been following a little bit of the training camp for the Steelers, but the quarterbacks have looked pretty brutal. Obviously, it's only like 3 or 4 days in, but it's
Yeah,
and it's the Steelers defense, but it's a little scary and just like will his yards per carry actually go up and are we actually seeing the same Steelers team? Is this sort of the beginning of the end of the Steelers consistency? Is a good question to ask. And
yeah,
that's sort of like the risk you run with Najee Harris. They're still not really that great up front on the O line, so there's a lot of questions about that. And I don't really like how high he's going either. I generally will not take him at the end of the first round because once I start to go through my team, if I do that, it just doesn't really seem to
yeah.
shape up that well. So my first pick as a bust is actually Joe Burrow because I saw him getting picked at the beginning of the 5th round today. And I was just like, this reminds me a lot of Baker Mayfield in his second year. There's always like this one like quarterback that just gets pushed up super far that cannot run either. So like he can move a little bit, but he's not a guy that's that mobile. Like is going to be scoring a lot of touchdowns, which is sort of the big thing. And I just sort of am like a little bit worried about a lot of the Bengals hype. Like a lot of it, it's just it all looks good on paper, but you never know until you actually go A in that division and B Super Bowl hangovers are real things. There's not like a lot of people who lose Super Bowls that end up like doing extremely well. It could be well for fantasy, but just I was just surprised by him. He got picked over Kyler Murray. He got picked over Jalen Hurts, like well over. I was like, I feel like 7th, 8th round. There's still Brady. I got in the 9th round, and it's just like would I take Burrow definitely over Brady by 4 rounds, maybe by like 1 round? Yeah, it just seems like there's that one quarterback that always goes a little high. Aaron Rodgers used to be a fourth round pick until he started dropping for a while. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's sort of what this feels like.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with this. It's scary because I mean, Joe Burrow to me is one of like I think he's going to win Super Bowls in the future. I think he's going to be phenomenal. I think he'll be a Peyton Manning, Tom Brady tier quarterback one day. Aaron Rodgers, where you know you can have Adam Gase be your offensive coordinator and you can still win games. Um, but I don't think that he's there yet. So I think right now you're still playing with Zach Taylor being the head coach, who I don't think is a good head coach.
Yeah, I mean, those guys like had like a couple of years where they're like third, 4th round quarterbacks. A lot of times, like you weren't picking even. I mean, how many times was Brady like a top 6th round pick? Like it really wasn't that.
And that's the other thing too. When Brady was a top 6 quarterback, he was failing to hit his draft capital
Yeah.
because it's hard to like to be a like I'm going to not run like no rushing touchdowns, very few rushing yards. It's hard to be at that level because I mean you got to throw
Almost 40
close.
touchdowns. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you got. I mean I wouldn't even say almost. I would say you have to hit 40
Yeah.
touchdowns. If you're not there, like you got to make it up in yardage, but you're going to be probably close to 40 touchdowns, like 40 plus touchdowns. probably closer to 45. And then you need to have close to like 5,000 yards, probably. Like, and you're talking all time record seasons at that point.
Yeah, it's a little
So
different with this extra game, but still, it's still the same idea.
yeah, it's just so much more difficult to make up for what I think last year he had under 200 yards rushing compared to someone like Jalen Hurts, who's going after Burrow, and he's probably going to have close to 900 yards. And that's just, that's so many more points.
Yeah. All right, we're going. Mine's a little. That was a little. QBs I feel like a little bit cheap to go off of, but
What,
interesting.
also for this sleeper section, I'd say this is sleepers and values.
Yeah, sleepers and values. I agree. So Leonard Fournette, you have him, and he's going what, beginning of the third, end of the second ish.
Yeah, I think he's
All the way
currently around
mid of the third.
301.
Yeah,
They will. Yeah, his current ADP is 301.
yeah,
I have him as a top 12 running back. So to get that in the third round is great. And then to go on top of that, I mean, I feel like a lot of people don't remember that he was like, there was a stint last year. I think it was between like week 4 and then like week 4, like 13 or 14, whenever he got hurt. Only 2 players outscored him during that time, and that was Austin Eckler and Jonathan Taylor. And that is because Brady will throw him the ball probably 5 times a game. And that gives you a nice baseline of an extra 2.5 points a game. I mean, he was averaging 2.5 or 5 receptions a game last year for that stint. And that just giving you that little baseline plus the yardage that goes with that. And being in the third round, it's just such a value.
yeah. I think he's about where I would take him. I like if I could get him in the mid early third round, I'd be happy with it. I think he's about where I would take him. I kind of agree. I understand your sleeperness because he does have like an insane. I feel like he has an insane ceiling because people always forget how much of a beast he really is just as a physical specimen and just running the ball. And I feel like they're going to run the ball a little bit more than they have in past years, just having the coaching change and Arians out. I feel like it's gonna be a little more dink and dunk and more Tom Brady led. So I think that does make sense. I've never really like when I do my sleepers. Sometimes I try to avoid Fournette because I remember we in past podcasts I talk about like my reluctance to pick Fournette now and before I was really into him. But I've never really like been like, oh, my team is, generally it's been better for my team whenever I've had Fournette in there, rather than having than passing on him. I guess I think he's a good, solid. I'm happy he's back to where he should be. I feel like in terms of a talent level, uh, which is closer to the top. So what I have at 5 is I just have Seahawks running backs. It's more of a lean towards Rashad Penny, because I feel like Penny's just a lot lower, which is surprising because Walker I think's like I've seen him like as high as like early sixth to as
Yeah.
late as like early seventh, and I can see Penny almost as late as like mid ninth. I've on certain sites I've seen Penny like in late sixth, early seventh, but usually he's around like 8, 9, which is crazy to me. Cause I mean he could suck and just get hurt and be terrible, but at that point you have there's no one there. Like there's no one there running back wise. You're picking up like backups and like little pieces. Like there's another guy that's actually late that is a little sleeper honorable mention is Naeem Hines. Like I think he's at like 11 or 12 now, and like just guys like that are sort of that mold. I think he'll start to rise when people realize Matt Ryan will pass to him. But you could potentially get a team that's basically saying we're going to run the ball and we're going to play defense, and then you have both the running backs like potentially in the seventh round. It just doesn't really like compute. You got to take a chance. Like if you can get him with good value, take a chance on one because like the chance is like there could be top 16 running back. Like it's like a decent shot. Hey, why not? And it's like barely giving up anything. So for me, it's just value. Just taking a shot at the Seahawks running back that isn't being overdrafted is really easy.
Yeah. So I would change this one for me to just Rashad Penny. I'm not in on Kenneth Walker at all.
Hmm.
Um, this is a guy like Pete Carroll is the guy who drafted Rashad Penny in the first round, and they went into the season, and it was Chris Carson, a seventh round pick, who led that team because he was not a rookie. Pete Carroll does not like rookie running backs. He likes running backs that can block and pass protect. So he's going to go with Rashad Penny. Now, Rashad Penny does have a little issue with staying on the field. If he stays on the field, to me, he's a top 24 running back. If he's not on the field, then obviously it's going to go to Kenneth Walker. Or honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to someone else besides Kenneth Walker because they don't. Pete Carroll just has a history of not
It's an
liking
old
rookie
school
running
team.
backs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm out on Kenneth Walker. I think Rashad Penny is going to be extremely valuable this year. And I'm every mock draft that I do, I try and grab Penny.
Yeah, they feel like there might be a move where Kenneth Walker might start to drop a little bit later, but we'll see. Um, so at 4 you have Tim Patrick, which is an interesting one because I feel like there's a lot of different people you could have picked from Denver. What do you think about Tim?
Um, well, I went with Tim Patrick specifically because he's not the 1-2. Like I'm going into the season and my head says Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton will be the top receivers. But Tim Patrick has proven himself consistently over the past 3 years and just got a 3-year extension last year from the Broncos. So the Broncos believe in him. And he's probably going to be out there in every three wide set. It wouldn't surprise me if, and the other thing is too, is if anything does happen to Judy or Sutton, Tim Patrick will be a very, very relevant and involved number two wide receiver.
Yeah,
Um, I think a lot of people don't like him because his name's Tim Patrick, and it's a very, very boring name.
yeah, and there is still concern about Jerry Judy. There was the charge that was dropped. It sounds like nothing's gonna happen, but that's not enough to actually plummet his value a little bit because right now Judy is actually neck and neck with Sutton right
Yeah,
now. I've seen him drop a little bit. So I mean, we've been talking about Tim Patrick for a while. I think we talked to him before, like well, even last year, because he's just like, how's this guy putting up these numbers?
yeah.
And he's just sort of falling under the radar. And it was getting annoying because he was stealing all these Penn State players' touches. I think KJ Hamler's also like one guy to like just watch, just because he won't be like a guy who'd put any big draft capital in, but Russell Wilson likes to
He's
take
a
deep
deep
balls.
sleeper to
Yeah,
me.
deep,
I
deep
mean,
last
I'm not,
last pick sleeper.
yeah, I'm not drafting him unless it's my last pick. And even then, I'm not sure if I'm taking him. But he is a guy that he has the speed and he profiles as a Tyler Lockett for this team.
Yeah. So my guy is like kind of a sleeper, but now he's sort of been rising up slowly and slowly. But I guess I'm just gonna keep pushing it forward. Because basically, I've been taking Swift to like as high as like 8 or 9. I basically been having him as my like fifth running back almost at recent ones. Like there's questions about who you could take, but people just keep on pushing the Lions and the Lions further and up. And I'm willing to just ride that train up. He just gets so many touches. The fact that Jamal Williams is gone, I'm not sure if you want to add anything. I don't really have any much more, but I just think he's going to be that guy outside the top four to sort of target. I know there's mixed signals. I
Um,
still kind of like Swift over him.
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'd put him as a sleeper or value, but I would put him as a breakout this year. I think that you could see him. I mean, he's not played a full season yet, and it's hard to play a full season at that position. But I mean, this is a guy that could easily do what McCaffrey did a few years ago with the 1,000 yards receiving, 1,000 yards rushing, and that's those are just stupid numbers for fantasy. So,
Yeah, part of the reason I
like,
only have him here is because I started this list like 3 weeks ago, and now he keeps
yeah,
rising.
yeah, I wouldn't to me, he's probably. I'm looking at my rankings. He's probably like 6 or 7. I'd have him right there next to Dalvin Cook. So,
Mhm. All right, so at 3 we have the Hollywood Brown slash Zach Ertz sort of Arizona
yes,
buy-in before Hopkins comes back again.
yeah, just I mean Hollywood. I think he will be good all year round. I think the targets will be there for him even once Hopkins comes back. I think you'll still see Hollywood get targets, and he'll do a lot more with them than what Christian Kirk did, which it's funny because he's next, but
Yeah.
uh, he'll do more with them than Kirk did, and he'll do more with them than AJ Green did or will do. And I like Zach Ertz here also, and I kind of shoved him in here because Zach Ertz is a player who's going like uh, ninth round right now, and I mean he's like, to me, like, he's awful to watch play, but he's a guy that you can put him in there and he'll probably get 4 or 5 receptions, and at tight end that's pretty solid. So like, I'm not calling for him to come out and finish this year as a top 5 tight end, but grabbing a tight end in the ninth round who will be extremely valuable for the first 6 weeks of the year, I'd call that a pretty big value slash sleeper. So
No, I like that because around that, it's always tough to try to pick that tight end around that like 8 to 11 area because I feel like all the top guys go and it's like hard to find good value. And it's always like I'm mixing between Dallas Goddard, Zach Ertz, and like Hawkinson. It's always a tough one. And Ertz kind of gives you that little edge, like he's going to be a primo target for 6 games. So that makes
yeah.
total sense. Whereas the other guys are just going to be another tight end. So at 4 or 3, I have Christian Kirk. I'm a lot higher on the Jags than you are. I know you're an anti-Jags in a little bit way, but this is sort of he's a number one receiver, and there's another guy who's going to be later who's a number one receiver, and he's going in like the ninth, 10th. It's just like someone's going to get the touches, and they're going to have to produce something. And they paid him all this money. They're not going to like not use him. So I just feel like they're going to try to get him the ball, force feed him the ball. He's been talking all about like how he wants to get out of Arizona and get this new spot. So I really like Christian Kirk here. I just think there's too many guys that are like really high on their depth chart that are so low at receiver on these, and we'll get to more later. But what do you think of that?
Um, I mean, I am down on Jacksonville, but I'm not really down on Christian Kirk. I like where he's going in the ninth round right now. It's just like, I don't see Christian Kirk coming out this year and somehow showing out to be like the number 15 wide receiver or anything, but being a like probably like just outside the top 24. I think that's probably what he'll be. He could even just sneak right into the top 24. He'll be right around that area, that like probably like 20 to 28 area. He'll probably fall in there. And to get him in the ninth round, I think is a great value.
Yeah, I think you'll get consistency, and like the guys that I see around him are like Hunter Renfro, which is like I feel like Kirk is just a way higher ceiling, and then he's like a whole round lower than Drake London. And Drake
Yeah.
London's got the ceiling, but he's a rookie playing for a horrible team, and Kirk's not a great team, but I think it's a little bit more stable than Atlanta. So at 2 you have Kirk Cousins, who I like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, so Kirk Cousins, new head coach that has come in, and everything that we've heard so far is that they will be throwing the ball. Um, People may forget this because we have short-term memory whenever it comes to fantasy, and at least for our league, a lot of people, I don't think, were playing whenever Kirk Cousins was with Washington and was the number 4 like QB in like points for fantasy. And I could easily see that coming back this year. I'm not predicting it. I don't think it'll happen, but this is a guy who has in the past thrown for that almost 40 touchdowns and 4,500 plus yards. Um, and I think that that's very reasonable. Like, I don't think it's very reasonable. Like, I'm not projecting him to do that. I'm just going to take a quick look at my stats real quick. Yeah, I have him projected for 35 touchdowns and 4,500 yards. Which to me gets him a low end QB. I think that puts him at 9 right there. Um, so to me, like, he's going in the 11th round right now. So I don't see why. Like, he's a great person to grab late in the draft. If you want to subscribe to the late QB method and you don't get any of the guys you want, you don't grab Trey Lance, you don't grab Brady, and you're just left with Kirk Cousins, I would be very, very happy to go into the season with Kirk Cousins as my QB1.
Yeah, I like him. I think he's like he kind of relates to Matt Stafford in a way. He's in, same kind of offense, and it's a little bit more tailored to him. Um, and I think that you're right about the Washington thing. People have been bringing that up, and people just forget. I mean, how consistent he is. He's a
Yeah.
high ceiling player. Like worst case scenario, he's going to be like what, like mid teens. Like you're still going to
Just
be able to
don't
fight.
play him during a primetime game.
Yeah, don't play him against a really good defense, or if he's playing Green Bay in primetime. And then you know he has an incredibly high ceiling. He got a new head coach OC slash thing, and he went from a run first team to a pass first team. And he's got one of the best young receivers in the league. Great running back, solid number two receiver, and I think he's. I mean, I guess they lost their tight end, so I guess it's Irv Smith now, totally. But
But
is better than Kyle Rudolph at this point.
Irv Smith, I actually had on this for a second as a sleeper
Yeah,
slash like value because Irv Smith was injured last year. He was supposed to be the guy last year, and he's extremely talented. And he's another one of the tight ends that are at the back of the draft that I'm grabbing whenever I can, basically, because I think Irv Smith could break out and be valuable as a touchdown option.
yeah. Even more, I feel like the one thing that he has above Kyle Rudolph is he can actually like move. He's not just attached on the option. He can actually
Yeah.
get yardage. So my number one is a little bit similar to Christian Kirk. It's just, man, he's so late for the first receiver on Green Bay. I mean, in the back-to-back QB MVP, and he made a joke calling him a Hall of Famer last week, but I mean, still, I mean, he's gonna put up numbers. It's just
Yeah.
way too late. I don't understand why he's going this late. It's just like, oh, I can pass on receivers because in the 10th round I can pick up Alan Lazard, and like, what's the worst case scenario? He's gonna be like an 800-yard, like, and a couple touchdowns. Like, yeah, it's not amazing, but it's definitely worth like a 10th or 11th round pick. Like it's just kind of weird that he hasn't at least risen up a little bit. Um,
Yeah, I completely agree with the Alan Lazard one. I mean, I have uh, just because I'm in my quarterback rankings and I can see my stats. I have Rodgers throwing 33 touchdowns this year, and who else is going to get the touchdowns that are being thrown? Like, I think I have Aaron Jones getting like probably the majority of them, but number two I have going to Lazard. Um, Rodgers as a QB that likes to only like he throws to players that he trusts and he
yeah, he's a
trusts
loyal guy.
Lazard.
Yeah,
Watson is not trusted yet. He's missing the first part of camp here. And then you have Cobb, but I mean Cobb's also like a million years old in terms of football years. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just
I agree with the Lazard late
not
round
higher.
grab him, and you basically have a good chance at getting the Green Bay number one wide receiver.
Yeah, it's just a strange that he hasn't risen higher. All right, so number one, you have Jameis Winston and Tua. This is surprising to me.
Yeah. So these guys fall under the sleeper categories. I don't consider them values. I'm not going out there and grabbing them as like value picks, but they are guys that if they're not on a roster go after going into week one and I have someone injured, I won't be surprised. Like these are a type of guy that I might add. Because both of these guys got massive weapon upgrades going into this season. Um, I mean, Tua already had Waddle, who had a breakout towards the back half of last year. So he gets the year two Waddle. He brings in Tyreek Hill. They bring in a new coach, and Tua, even with the numbers he put up last year, he was one of the more accurate quarterbacks throwing downfield. So I'm not calling for I'm not like I don't see Tua coming out and being like a top 5 QB or anything. But whenever you do get that addition of weapons that Tua gets, where you add a top 5 wide receiver, it will definitely help your numbers. And then you look at Jameis Winston, who last year was extremely inconsistent whenever it came to yardage. His numbers didn't make sense last year,
Yeah,
but
it was like 5
he did
touchdowns,
have
nothing.
5 touchdowns and like 120 yards passing just doesn't make sense. But this is a team that is trying to win this year. They have a great defense. There's a chance still that Kamara misses the first. I've heard anywhere from 2 to 6 games. That's kind of where things are being talked about for his suspension. Um, but you're going to get Michael Thomas back. You're going to get Jarvis Landry, who, like, I'm not calling for Jarvis Landry to be an elite wide receiver or anything, but he's a great number 3 wide receiver on your team. And I think Chris Olave is going to step in. And I've heard great things so far about
Yeah, they're
him.
talking about.
And so when you go from a situation where your number 1 wide receiver last year was I'm blanking on his name.
Callaway?
I was gonna go with Smith.
Yeah,
So
Traquan Smith or Callaway.
yeah, perfect example. It's
Yeah,
Callaway or Traquan Smith, to both of those guys being way down the depth chart and
yeah,
probably won't see any play time as a receiver unless it's due to an injury. That's just such an increase in weapons. And I could see Winston go back to putting up those crazy numbers that he was putting up with Tampa. Probably not to the extent, and you won't have the luxury of him throwing touchdowns for both teams. Like they won't let him throw the ball if he's throwing 30 interceptions in a season.
yeah.
But I could see him still getting those touchdown numbers, just reduced interceptions in this offense. So
Yeah, no, both those make sense. And I think the new coaching staff's going to help out each. I think Tua is going to be, having a better balanced team and just a better offensive mind in general. I mean, uh, for blanking on what was the coach? Flores? Flores was the coach.
yeah,
Defensive minded, like great defense, but the offense was always a mess. And Winston, I think, like Sean Payton, having Sean Payton for a year is great just so he can learn mechanics and like help out with his stuff. But he wasn't putting up big numbers with Peyton outside of just weird, touchdowns with no passing yardage. I think they both kind of like help out that, and I think the same situation's a lot better. Just besides, they lost the blocker and the running back, but that actually puts more on Winston's plate, and that's just going to mean more fantasy points. And throwing a pick six every once in a while isn't that bad for fantasy. Yes, it's fun
it
to
helps
do.
for fantasy.
Yeah, but you have to put up more points. Um, so my number one is actually Zeke Elliott, just because I keep being surprised by how much he's falling, even though he's pretty consistent the past couple of years. Every single year, even like a year or two, I was like, man, he should be falling, and then he's still a top 12 pretty much every single year, without like much of an issue. And he is below James. He's like the end of the third round now, and I'm just like, why? I'm like, I would not take. I mean, maybe in theory, James Conner over Zeke Elliott, but just I mean, they're gonna have a worse O line, which sucks, but they're not gonna have Cooper. They're not gonna have Gallup. It's gonna be literally like CD Lamb and then the guy that they just picked up. Like
Tolbert.
yeah. So they're gonna have to rely on Elliott and Pollard. So like he's gonna get his touches. He presumably should be healthy. Might be his last year or two where he's gonna be like a dominant running back. But I just can't see it. I just don't see why he would be falling this far. It just feels like uh, it's hard to let him keep dropping when I'm in the middle or early third round. He's available. It's just like he's around
Yeah.
that Fournette level, I think, and he's falling almost a whole round below Fournette.
So I'm all in on Zeke. He's in, like, honestly, like, I've found myself a lot of times going 3 running backs or going wide receiver, running back,
Yeah, the three running back
because
scares me a little bit, but yeah, going receiver
I
first.
I love I love being able to grab Zeke or Fournette in the third and grabbing like Aaron Jones or uh DeAndre Swift in the second and stuff like that. Because I mean Zeke, he finished as the number 6 running back last year. Now that was granted to the fact that he played every single game. But he didn't look good in the back half, and I think a lot of people don't realize that he was injured like week 4.
Yeah, he had a PCL like the entire year.
Yeah, and those first 4 weeks, like he put up solid numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I think he had 2 of those where he had 20-point weeks. He got off to a rough start because it was against the Bucks, who had an amazing run
Yeah, that was just
defense.
a pass.
So, um, but I mean, to me, it's just like I think a big reason why he's fallen so far is it's basically he got off to a slow start last year, and then he was injured for the back half. So you didn't really have those blow up weeks that won you weeks, except for those first couple weeks, and then just name fatigue.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like just people are ready for him to move on, and
Yeah.
it was just weird how I mean I feel like he's still like late second, early third, but he's falling to like I thought had like 3.9, and I was just like, wait, what? He's not ready for that yet. So anything else you want to bring up?
Um, Not really. I think it'll be really interesting come draft season to see what people do in our league between name fatigue and trying to get like the new hotness and like a Javante Williams who I
Who's
love, but
jumping around?
also could still be in a running back committee. And we'd like we've seen him have spurts, but we've not seen him do it consistently. And it'll just be interesting to see where everyone gets drafted. I'm excited.
Yeah, middle. Well, now it's all starting to the training camp and the rumors. Is sort of where it kind of gets interesting in the first preseason game. All right, so we'll talk to you guys next time.